Welcome back everyone, I hope you're doing well today. This video might be a little bit of a long one. It's a combination of all the hitting tips that I have post-patch to help you have the most success in ranked seasons, BR, and any other kind of online gameplay in MLB The Show. I will have a follow-up video after this one to kind of respond to any of the questions and comments that you guys have about this video, and also include some of the tips that combine well with my tips that we can get from the actual top players of this game. Personally, I'm a consistent World Series player, nothing special about my record or anything like that, but my focus here is to give you guys options for when you feel like you're kind of an average player, but you also feel like you could be better than you are, and try to get you to climb up the ranks. So I will never pretend to be a top player or anything like that, but like I said, I was once average and got myself to a point where I was making World Series consistently, so I want to show you guys some tips on how to take yourself from one spot to the next. If you think you're below average and want to become average, I hope this one helps you as well. It's a little bit of an intermediate type video and does require a little bit of baseball knowledge, but I feel like anybody that's come this deep into YouTube to find a video about hitting tips, you probably know a little bit about baseball already. Sometimes it's just a matter of taking your knowledge from real life and real life baseball and putting it into a video game, sometimes easier said than done. So hopefully we can help bridge that gap today. So what we're really going to be talking about today is, first of all, before you even get into gameplay, is how to build your team and your lineup, talk about the meta and what's working and what's not working, and also certain swings and how you can determine what kind of swing is the best for you. That'll be followed with some physical gameplay tips that you can try to implement right away. And we'll also talk about the game plan that you can have to have a mental edge and to be able to react and adjust throughout the game, because that's really what can take you from one level to the next. So hope this video helps, and let's get right into it. So let's get into the first part of building your team. The very first thing to keep in mind is that whenever you're picking your players that you want on your squad, you want to go off of your own strengths and weaknesses and not overalls. So don't give in to the peer pressure. If someone says that a card is really good, if a player is really good, but you can't hit with them or you can't pitch with them, don't worry about it. Just get the guys and keep the guys in your rotation and lineup that you do well with. Now the nice thing about this year is that since a lot of the cards you can buy off the market and then go back and sell, you can try out a bunch of different guys, and if you don't like them, you can sell them and get someone else. Last year or previous years, you would have to lock them into your collection, and then you'd be kind of out of luck if you grinded for that card for a very long time. So give them a shot, give them 50 to 100 at-bats, and if you like them, keep them. If you don't, get rid of them. It doesn't matter what the number on their card is. If a guy that's 92 overall is hitting better than a 99, stick with the 92. Now sometimes how well you do with a card can be dependent on the difficulty. So if you're playing on All-Star below 700, and then all of a sudden you start to climb above but then drop back down, sometimes it's because the cards you used on All-Star aren't as good on Hall of Fame, especially when the PCI is smaller. For instance, a guy like Aaron Judge might be really good for you below 700, but once you get to the Hall of Fame level, his PCI is pretty tiny, and it might be hard to hit with him, so maybe switch him out for someone with a little bit better contact and vision. You also want to know your strengths and weaknesses, so if you don't hit many home runs in the first place, focus more on your speed and defense, and personally I don't care about speed for offense, I care about speed for the outfield and for the middle infield so that they can catch as many balls as possible. If you like to steal bases, then of course that's valuable as well. And if you use zone but don't place the PCI too well, just look for guys with high vision and big PCIs. Now those are the things you want to look for before you pick your cards. Now after you pick your cards and you are trying to figure out who you're good with, these are a few things to keep in mind about their swings and their nuances about the swings that can help you figure out patterns for which guys you like the most. So these nuances that you want to look for are the hitters that have different swing lengths, stride/leg kick timings, green/good zones, hot/cold zones, and contact point patterns. Swing lengths usually aren't noticeable except when they're bad. So guys like Piazza, and for me Bellinger as well, have very long swings which can make them tough to use for more people than average. This is kind of at the top of the list for me for things that I don't want in a swing, because yeah, you can tell yourself that you want to turn on a fastball, swing a little bit early, and then make pretty good contact with it, but that requires you to kind of get ahead of yourself and makes you susceptible to off-speed and breaking balls, which makes it tough to have good at-bats, especially with 2 strikes. But sometimes you don't have the option of using somebody else, maybe you're playing BR or something, so it's good to know who has a long swing and kind of prepare yourself for that approach that either you want to try to pull fastballs very early, or you can try to have an opposite field approach and just hit off speed as well. The second swing nuance, which is very visible, is the stride/the leg kick timings, and that can really affect your fastball timing especially. Some people really like to react quickly So someone with a quick leg kick like Rogers Hornsby or Willie Mays, for that person, will have a pretty good swing. But for someone like me that kind of likes to have a slow leg kick, a high leg kick like Bautista, Hornsby ends up feeling like a really good off-speed hitter for me, and I have trouble hitting the fastball sometimes. So kind of take a look at what kind of pattern you see in the hitters that you do well with. If you feel like you do well with someone like Hornsby, maybe try to find guys with minimal leg kicks or really quick leg kicks. Sometimes that's just a pattern that works for you. This one is completely up to your personal preferences. I don't think there's a good or bad leg kick timing, but it seems like a lot of people like the high, slow ones like Bautista. So keep that in mind when you're looking at someone's stride. Now this next one might seem like a disadvantage at first, and especially if you don't know what you're looking at, it can be really frustrating to hit with guys like this. But once you see what's going on, it actually is a major benefit. So in your swing feedback, your green zone is where you should have timed your swing to make the best contact with the ball. Now some hitters like Frank Thomas, Duke Snider, Robinson Cano, Willie Mays, and many others have deep green zones that show up behind the front of the plate. Pretty much every hitter gets deep green zones when the ball is on the outside half of the plate, but these guys specifically, and guys like them, have deep green zones even on inside pitches. So because the green zone is just behind the front of the plate, you end up pulling pitches foul that seem like they should be fair. Your bat makes contact with the ball just early, and the ball shoots down the line for a foul ball. This really happens a lot with righty-righty or lefty-lefty matchups and can be kind of frustrating, but it's actually really nice for righty versus lefty or lefty versus righty matchups. Especially with the left-handed hitters, it feels like you can never get jammed with these guys. Now to overcome this on righty-righty and lefty-lefty matchups, I really try to focus on going up the middle or the other way. Or for someone with big power like Frank Thomas, I try to hit it just left of center. And we'll talk about how to focus on doing that with the approach in a little bit later in this video. But my focus is trying to go just left of center. I'm never really trying to pull the ball with these guys, because when you try to go to center field, you'll end up pulling it just because of the way the hitting engine works and how their swing works. So if you see any kind of hitter like this with a deep green zone, just try to go up the middle. The benefit for this is also that you can see the ball for a little bit longer, which is generally a good way to hit. Usually seeing the ball longer means you have to go the other way, but for these guys, you can see the ball a little bit longer and pull it, which means you have more chance of slugging, hitting home runs and doubles. The next swing nuance comes from hot and cold zones, and they're one of the most visible pieces of information that we can see and we've been able to see for a very long time. Even so, I can't give a definitive answer to whether or not they actually affect hit results. Either way, I do pretty consciously tend to pitch in those spots anyway. If anybody has a definitive answer for that, let me know in the comments below. I would imagine because there's so much simulation and math that goes behind every swing, I would assume that these hot and cold zones actually do something. But of course you can't just spam one spot, because when someone sits in that spot, it'll be easy for them to hit it. Now this final swing nuance is just below long swings for me in terms of how much I hate it. But honestly, for some people, it's probably not a big deal. And it doesn't affect your results too much. You can still get base hits, but sometimes it affects your slugging and it affects your situational hitting. So this is the contact point patterns that go hand in hand with the green zones. For deep greens, being slightly early results in a foul ball. But here, certain hitters like Tony Gwynn, Mookie Betts, Scooter Gennett, and Andrew McCutchen have an odd pattern where you can have a good swing, where you make contact with the ball way out in front of the plate, in the green zone, square it up with perfect timing, and the ball goes to the opposite side of the field. For deep greens, the opposite kind of happens, where the contact parallel to the plate results in pulling the ball. Here, you're making contact early and end up going the other way. Like I said, overall, this doesn't really affect your results, except for in situational hitting and when you're trying to pull the ball with power. As someone who does like to hit home runs, when the ball goes the other way and reduces your exit velocity, it's a little bit frustrating. So if you notice yourself doing poorly with guys with this kind of contact pattern, don't try to force yourself to use that card. Again, for all of these swing nuances, sometimes it's just nice to know what they are, so that if you're playing in something like BR and you're kind of forced to use a card, you know how to kind of overcome the little nuances with their swing and maybe have a couple of clutch swings to get you to a 12-0. In ranked seasons, sometimes you're just trying to figure out who your best 9 are and try to put them in your lineup. So that's how I would go about building my squad. Before the patch that we just had a couple of weeks ago, I was really focusing on high vision, high contact guys and forgetting about power and just power swinging every single time. It was really hard to slug the ball and get anything going against guys like Kershaw because the per 9s for his card were so good. Now I feel a little bit more comfortable with power guys and using X again, so I wouldn't really focus on that. If you like hitting home runs, you should be able to do it now after the new patch. Now let's get into some of the physical tips I have for you when you're hitting the baseball. First of all, before you even look at the screen, I want you to look at your hand on the controller. This tip that I'm about to give you actually made me way more consistent hitting the baseball, especially fastballs, and it reduced my reaction time as well, which is huge when you only have about 0.4 of a second to hit a baseball. So what I used to do is that I used to have my entire thumb flat against the right side of the controller, and then kind of the middle of my thumb pad pressing the X button when it was time to swing. Now if you try pressing it right now, you can feel all the different muscles in your thumb that are getting flexed when you press the X button. You can probably feel the pressure all the way down to the base of your thumb, even close to your wrist. Now some of you probably already naturally do this, but it wasn't something I naturally did. So what I started doing is I put my thumb at 90 degrees. Basically the knuckle closest to the tip of my thumb was getting flexed just enough to where all the pressure and force was coming from that knuckle. Now if you press that, you can feel how different and how quick it is to press the X button when that knuckle is flexed a little bit. And now it feels like the thumb joint is probably pretty loose and doesn't have much force going through it, which means it'll take less time for your brain to react and less time for your thumb to react to press the X button. This might only shave off a couple of milliseconds, but when it comes down to hitting, a couple of milliseconds are actually pretty huge. That's why a gaming monitor is so much better than a TV, even if you're just shaving off 5 milliseconds. Now the other thing that you can try before you get into the gameplay is you can try to change your eye level when you're looking at the screen. So you can either try to sit below eye level with the plate so that you're kind of looking up towards your monitor or TV, and it can help you focus on some low pitches, especially when someone's peppering you down there. You can also tilt your monitor upwards, which is what I do, and it kind of gives you a little bit better of an angle from the ball to the plate so that your eyes aren't moving too much. Also adjust how far you sit away from the monitor. I've noticed that there's a little bit of a sweet spot where you're not too far to the point where the ball's kind of small and you can't pick up any of the break. But if you're too close, sometimes your eyes are moving too fast and it's hard to catch up and exactly place the PCI. So try to find a sweet spot where you're able to see the ball pretty well and also time it up pretty well. Alright, so let's get into the process for me and how I hit pitches. This year's a little bit different from last year, where last year you could pretty much cover every pitch at every point. But with the increased pitch speeds this year, you basically have to sit on pitches in order to hit with any kind of authority. Now some people, especially with the top players that you can see on Twitch and everything, these guys have really good reaction times and they can hit a lot of different ways just because of how talented they are. Now someone like maybe you or me who have a little bit lower of reaction time but know baseball decently well, maybe not the most knowledgeable about baseball, maybe not the best physical skills, but if you can put all this together and you learn how to guess hit, it can take you a long way. Now keep in mind, in my opinion at least, being consistently in between is worse than being way early on a changeup. Meaning, I want you to crush the fastball, even if it means you look silly on breaking balls and changeups. At least to start out. You'll be able to cover more pitches over time, at least to make sure that you're covering the fastball and force the pitcher to throw something else. Now one pattern which is very huge, this is one pattern that I've been noticing since the beginning of this game, is that guess hitting is rewarded more than perfect PCI placement. So what do I mean by that? Especially on All-Star, getting the PCI in the correct quadrant of the zone is more important for the launch angle and exit velocity than lining it up with the pitch as the pitch is traveling, otherwise known as tracking. So I'll give you an example right here, which has been very consistent for me, although getting a little bit better as the year goes on with new patches. But you might notice that if you start the PCI at the very bottom of the zone and hit a low pitch like a sinker or changeup out of the zone, you'll actually get a pretty good swing on the ball, a line drive over the infield, maybe in front of the outfield. And a lot of times it'll land for a base hit. But if you start the PCI high and square up a ball in the zone, but on the lower half, you get a hard ground ball. In the first situation, you probably only got a little piece of the baseball or maybe not at all. And the second one, you got all of the ball, but had a much worse swing. And this is much more consistent than not. I'm still testing out a theory that you can actually move from one half of the plate to the other with good results, but you need to get the PCI there early and it can't be moving on contact. Either way, guess hitting makes this easier for probably 80% of us. If tracking is working for you, stick with it. But personally, tracking forces me to swing at pitches out of the zone. I feel like I can't track it quick enough. I end up pressing the X button a little bit too late. So guess hitting's been working for me really well. Now on Hall of Fame, it is still true that guess pitching is a little bit better than tracking, but you also need pretty good placement as well. So those low pitches out of the zone probably won't be in your favor anymore, but the same negative results will happen when you start the PCI high and go to the bottom of the zone more often than not. If you're just guess hitting, it's a lot easier to just stay on a quadrant, especially when you have slow reaction time. Sometimes you just can't catch up if you're starting high and in to go low and away. So that's kind of what guess hitting is to me, and let's talk about how you actually go ahead and do it and what you should be looking for. Guess hitting pretty much just takes some trust in your skills and knowledge of the game. It's kind of deflating to continually miss the sweet spot on pitches that you're looking for. So that means it requires practice, and I've got a video on how to practice, or try to find a friend or someone to play a friendly against and just have them throw fastballs at you for a whole game. This is pretty good practice on how to hit the fastballs and try to look for certain pitches in certain spots. For guess hitting, I also visualize where I want to hit the pitch to give myself an internal timing. Obviously, you're looking to put the PCI early to whatever spot you think the guy is going to throw it to you, but what I'm saying is that I also want to think of where I want the ball to go after I make contact. So in my mind, I'm thinking of the ball leaving the pitcher's hand, coming to the plate, and where I want it to go. That kind of gives me an internal timing for when I should be swinging at the pitch and where it should be when I swing at it. This can really help you pull inside pitches when you're late on them consistently. It's also useful for you to prevent pulling outside pitches and just rolling over on top of them. Sometimes all you have to do is press R2 to see what happened in the previous at-bat. If you saw that the pitcher was throwing away from you the entire time, just try to go the other way. Think of your internal timing, think of where you want to hit the ball, and it makes it a lot easier. Remember that when you're thinking about mechanics and things like that during a swing, especially in real life, it makes it much harder to hit. You want to be thinking about your approach only. That's why I say it takes trust in your skills, because you have to be confident in the fact that when you do have the right approach, you're going to turn on the ball. So I start off the game by looking for the pitch which I can do the most damage on, early in the count and early in the game. For me personally, this is slightly up and slightly inside. A lot of people don't throw this location when you get up in ranked seasons, but when you play Battle Royale, a lot of people do throw in this spot. The reason why I like this spot is because it's where my eyes line up the best on my monitor, and also I think it's a good spot for where you can slug the ball really easily. People don't generally throw completely down the middle all the time. If you're looking for pitches just down the middle, you might have a little less success. Over time, you can kind of get the pattern for the way the guy's pitching, and you can adjust based off of that. But wherever you feel the most comfortable attacking in a certain location, that's where you should start. Adjust based off of that. Make the pitcher make you adjust. Now, the most important part about this is that if the pitch isn't the one where you want, when you want it, take it, even if it's a strike early in the count. This is, of course, much easier said than done and takes practice and commitment. I have a plate discipline guide, which I'll link to this video, and I'll also be redoing it with some more tips for the 2019 season. But for now, I'll give you some more tips on how to do that exactly. Just remember, you have 3 strikes to work with. If it's not where you want it early, don't worry about it. If you can score 5 runs in a ranked seasons game, you're going to win a lot of games. And that means you don't have to square up every pitch in every inning. So when you're guess hitting, there are a few possible results, and I'll go through them and kind of show you how you can think about your game plan for your entire game. First of all, like I said, in BR, a lot of people like to throw up and in. And with the silvers and commons that you have to throw in BR, sometimes it's really hard to control those guys. So sometimes you're locked in, you set your PCI where you think you can be the most dangerous, and you just crush the ball and the guy quits in the first inning. Of course, this doesn't happen a good percentage of the time, but when you're locked in, it can happen. So that's the first one. Number 2 is that you crush the ball a couple times and the guy keeps throwing there a few times per inning, but not super consistently. Now, if you're way more comfortable in one particular part of the zone, you can continue to sit there and make the most of the fewer opportunities that you're about to get. But if you feel like you can pick a new spot in the zone and still be productive, try adjusting there and going back to your original spot if you need to. If you can cover multiple spots, you're going to be extremely dangerous. Number 3 is kind of unfortunate, but it does happen, which is where you're sitting on a certain pitch, but you're still not catching up to it, so he keeps throwing there. Some days you just don't have it, and you have to either try a new option or trust yourself that eventually you'll put a few swings together. If you're pitching pretty well, sometimes it all takes is a couple good swings at the end of the game. This happens a lot when you're in between 2 speeds, so maybe you're sitting up high, but the guy's throwing sliders and also fastballs, so maybe you're a little bit in between, you're popping up the fastball to center field. What you really want to do is to dedicate to one pitch and just forget about the other one. If he's throwing the slider and hanging it a little bit too much, just look for that pitch. If he's throwing the fastball, you're comfortable hitting the fastball, just look for that pitch. The 4th scenario is that you crush the ball a couple times, so the guy doesn't throw there for a few innings. This is the most likely scenario as you rise through the ranks, but the nice thing is that if you have taken away a spot from a pitcher, then you basically have a 1 in 3 chance of guessing correctly. It's very good odds when you find a new zone to sit in, because you have 3 strikes to work with. If you sit in one spot, you're very likely to get a pitch there at some point. If you're consistently hitting high and in fastballs, then all of a sudden you switch to low and in and you're still hitting that, it can be very frustrating for a pitcher. And this kind of goes hand in hand with number 5, which is sometimes the guy just never throws there. Maybe you sit up and in, and this guy is very afraid of giving up the home run, so he just never throws up and in. So let's say you're playing ranked, and those are the two scenarios, right? Where you crushed it, or he just never threw there, so you got to find a new zone to sit in. So the question is, what should be the new spot to sit in? What should I look for? And we'll get into that in just a second. But first of all, just remember, don't adjust away from your strength until it's clear that you won't benefit from it. Now let's think of a little analogy here. When you take a test at school, they say that the best way to guess when you don't know the answer is to bubble in the same letter every single time, so that at least you get a few of them correct. In baseball, you get 3 chances in an at-bat, so if you're wrong twice, you still have a real chance at success even if you guess the same pitch again. But also remember that Einstein said that insanity was doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. So, how do these 2 points work together? You can start by thinking of one at-bat or one inning as one exam. Try to control one zone for a short period of time. Sometimes this is enough to be successful. Now when you get to the exam, you look back on your previous exam and see how to fix what you did wrong. Hopefully you know more now, but if not, you can still guess the same way you did before. So if you were great on the first exam, make sure that you check the study guide to study any new material, because being successful once doesn't mean it'll happen again. So to bring this back to hitting, the next inning you can think back to the pattern that the pitcher was using, or use the pitcher analysis tool to see what your opponent's patterns are. I try to look at how many of each pitch he throws and generally where he throws them, although not usually until the middle innings, just so I can kind of build up a body of work and see exactly what the pattern would be. So even if you got 0 hits in the first inning, you can pick on something you saw him throwing a few times already. So if you notice on first pitch he's throwing a low slider but it's in the zone, you can sit on that pitch the next inning. And if you did well in the previous inning and then all of a sudden he changes what he was doing before, just be ready to adjust to his new patterns. There are a lot of times where someone scores 4 runs in the first inning and then nothing for the next 8 innings. So don't be that guy. So to kind of tie that all together, when you have nothing to go off of, and maybe you just didn't study for an exam or whatever, you can try to guess. But when you guess the same thing over and over until you prove that it's not working. There's only so many combinations of good pitches that a person can make, and especially until you get to the very top levels, not many people are great pitchers. A lot of pitchers are going to make mistakes a lot of times. There are players in the MLB who make their living off of hitting mistakes. So right, you guess the same pitch for a little while. If it doesn't work, you make your adjustment. You study up on what they were throwing, and then you come back to the next exam, the next at-bat, with more information. You can still call it guess hitting. You're pre-placing the PCI. But now that you actually have information, it's a very educated guess. So that's kind of the difference, right? At first, maybe you're completely guessing, you have no reference for what to go off of. Once you study up, you have information, you're making educated guesses, which kind of trims off the fat and gives you a few specific spots to look for. This kind of game plan does take a lot of thinking. You can't just jump into the game and all of a sudden try to react, but over time, it does come a little bit more naturally. But if you're distracted or something else is going on, you're watching TV at the same time, this can be a little bit tough to do. So a couple things to think of before we end this video is number 1, squaring up baseballs only really happen when they're hittable. Plate discipline has a lot to do with this. So if you're getting pitches that are either off of the plate, first of all, or hitting the corners in good spots where you're not looking for it, they become not hittable pitches. When you try to swing at those, you're putting yourself at a severe disadvantage. Anybody who knows baseball and has watched baseball, played baseball, already know this information. Sometimes it just takes a little bit of a rethinking to get that information from real life into the video game. Remember that baseball is just a game of percentages, so give yourself the highest chance of success. Now, if you swing at everything, you'll run into a few pitches and score a few runs, and against lesser pitchers, you might start feeling like you're doing really well, but it turns out that you're actually being impatient. Maybe you have the good physical skills to square up pitches against bad pitchers, but maybe as soon as you get to someone who starts throwing a little bit off the zone, starts making you work for it, you start to drop a little bit in your batting average. That's how I was for a very long time, and still am a lot of times. It takes a lot of thinking and a lot of effort for me to go out and say, I need to not swing at that pitch, I need to do something a little bit better, take a couple pitches, and a lot of times you find out that you were only about 1 pitch away from getting a pretty good pitch to hit. The higher you climb in ranked seasons, the more your opponent will catch on and make you get yourself out. Good at-bats get you much farther than just good physical skills. This is kind of where you see someone in AAA who hits .310, but then .230 in the majors. And you can contrast this with someone who hit 280 in the minors, 30 points less than the other guy, but when he comes up to the major, he hits 270. Maybe this guy doesn't have the physical skills that the other guy had, but he has better at-bats. He hits the pitches that he knows he can hit, and he stays in the majors and becomes a productive guy because of it. There are plenty of people in AAA, AA, even single A that probably have very, very good tools, very strong, very good at making contact, but as they rise through the ranks, and they're not quite as patient as they need to be, and hitting the pitches that they should be swinging at, they become much less effective hitters. There are certain guys in the major leagues who have fewer physical tools, but they stay in the majors because they know how to have good at-bats. And remember, especially in this game, pitchers pitch a lot differently with runners in scoring position. With the bases empty, pitchers will be a little bit more aggressive, so sometimes you might get a base hit and another base hit, and then all of a sudden, the next 6 pitches, the pitcher's throwing you things that they weren't throwing you before, breaking balls off the plate, changeups, trying to jam you differently. They no longer throw you strikes sometimes. So that's the final point that I want to share, is that when you have runners on, just be sure to be a little bit more patient than you were before, because the pitcher really wants you to get yourself out with runners on scoring position. So that's what I have for you here today in this video, going over the best way to build your lineup, some of the best physical ways that you can hit the baseball, and also a little bit about how you can game plan and have really good at-bats. Now, I've done my best to avoid looking at other YouTubers' hitting tips videos throughout the year, so anything that I put into this video, I did my best not to plagiarize anything, so that everything that I'm giving you right now is from what I've learned rising through the ranks and being kind of an average player to being just good enough to make World Series consistently. What it also means is that I don't have the tips from the greatest players in the game, but when I make a follow-up video, I will try to include some of the tips that they have given as well, so I can put them all together with my own tips, and if you like what I've been saying, we can kind of tweak a few things here and there so that you have the best possible game plan for you. That follow-up video will also include any comments and questions you have about this video, so I can put that all together for you. Now, if you've been subscribed for a while and been wondering where all the content is, well, my schedule has been a little bit different, so I've been streaming every day at 2 p.m. Central Time on Twitch. If you'd like to see consistent content from me, Twitch is the best place to find me, and I'm going to try my best to get some things working on YouTube for this year, but I will be putting out as many tips videos as I can throughout the rest of the year, especially when I have important information that I know you guys are going to benefit from. So I really hope this video helped you out. If you have any comments or questions about the stuff that we talked about in this video that I can follow up on, let me know, because I will try to put it in that follow-up video. Again, thank you for watching. I'm Dude Food, and I'll see you guys later.